Welcome back. I'm David. I'm a licensed marriage, family, child therapist, and I'm going to continue my series on breakups. And today it's rather a dark topic. After a breakup, there's usually hurt and anger, but sometimes it even leads to resentment, even hatred. That's where I'm going to go today. And my topic is called When Love Turns Cruel. So stay with me. Only a fool dreams of someone he cannot have. That's what one of my clients felt after his breakup. I'll just call him John. He didn't initiate it. He was still madly in love with her. And despite the roller coaster of insecurities, his love never seemed to waver. No matter what she threw at him, he believed his deep love for her, compassion, his patience would eventually heal things. But then without warning, she ended it abruptly. No closure, no clear reason, just an email, almost an AI generated in tone, explaining that she had too many issues or that she didn't want to keep triggering his insecurities. She even reduced the relationship to fond memories, which was a real slam to John. She never acknowledged the emotional fallout that John would be left holding. To him, it felt like a switch had been flipped. She had become someone he didn't even recognize. At first, John waited. He told himself, if I just hold on, if I keep loving her, she'll realize the pain I'm in. But that moment never came. Instead, there was confusion and it deepened into betrayal. He started to believe that she had been leading him on, gaslighting him, that maybe she never really was in love with him, just dabbling maybe in some version of a modified polyamorous arrangement. Then something even darker crept in. John started to feel hatred, and he had never felt hatred before, but now it bubbled up. It wasn't because he stopped caring, but he wanted her to feel with the same intensity, what he was feeling. Her indifference or stone cold detachment made it impossible for him to reconcile the love that he knew person. That's the cruelty of love. It can flip from passion to pain, from connection to indifference, from tenderness to resentment. John had given up everything to commit to her, and she seemed to walk away without losing a thing. After a breakup, it's easy to beat yourself up. You replay every moment, every word. You convince yourself that you blew it. You end up with obsessive what ifs, which I talked about in another episode. But after uh, I said something to John, he started to look at it differently. So after I heard his story, I said to John, John, maybe it wasn't that your love pushed away. Maybe your love was real. You were open, intense, wholehearted. That's the way love's meant to be when you truly feel it. You gave her the best of yourself, the best version of yourself. What really happened, it wasn't that, it was just that she wasn't ready or perhaps not capable of stepping into what love demands. That wasn't your failure, it was her limitations. That hit him pretty hard. It was just a reminder that sometimes love isn't rejection, but it feels so intense. It's too much. And sometimes it's rejection because the other person simply can't receive it. And maybe her inability to accept, it's about her timing, her fears, her readiness, not about his worth. John, over time, he started to realize that he was carrying resentment like a chain tied to his pain. He kept playing the story over and over, which fueled his anger and was burning him inside. Slowly he began to let go of the bitterness, not because she apologized or explained, but he just needed to have this sense of freedom. And it wasn't replaced with the same kind of romantic love. It was something more quieter, something more at a distance. But he realized he could love her as a human being and care for her without her needing to be his partner. And this love was transferred from clinging to releasing. He told me once at the end that he says, I don't hate her anymore. I just love her differently, without expectations, without strings, and far enough so he felt like he could breathe again. And I told John, I said, maybe this is really what closure is about, right? So here's the lesson I wanted to pass on. Stop carrying the entire blame for the relationship not working. Ask yourself, was your love real? Did you show up with honesty, courage, and heart? If the answer is yes, then you didn't fail. You loved the way love is supposed to be lived. Is my resentment keeping me tied to the pain? And can I transform that love into something freer, something that honors both of us, even if it's from a distance? And when you're thinking back on the relationship, try to identify moments where your love was genuine and open, regardless of the outcome. Try to be accountable. Look at your part. Do you did play a significant part that suggests some insecurities and issues, some work to be done. Try to reframe the rejection as their limitation, not your flaw. And if you could honor yourself for one way that you showed up in love, what would that be?